Filcha. 1,000 welcomes to Kranapiha Short Stories and Poetry for April 12th, 2024. I'm Terrance Ó Domhnaill, your Irish scéalaí, with more stories and poems from more medium writers. So I have 2 stories and 3 poems this week. The first is Chapter 11 of the ongoing story From Beyond the Water Wall, then a somewhat lengthy story of a dystopian future western United States, a poem about the ocean in the Pacific Northwest, a short poem about spring sunsets, and another wonderful meditative poem by David B. to round things out. So gather around once again, and let me bring these stories and poems to life for you. So, to start off with, we have From Beyond the Water Wall, Chapter 11, A Small Celebration by Don Woodby, published in the Fiction Writer's Den. So as remember from last week, we were left with him and Wren making deals with these militia members for munitions. So we pick that up again. When Mars and Wren turned around the corner, Abby and Spike already waited for them in the middle of the alley. Abby sat sideways on top of a red motorcycle, and Spike leaned on a wall in the shadows. The nauseating smoke from his cigarette spread around the environment. Hanging on the motorcycle's handlebars, a dark bag swung back and forth, moved by little pushes from Abby's long fingers. Everything was dark, except for a light post blinking inconstantly. "Let's do this fast," Spike said, pushing his back against the wall to gain an impulse. Abby stood up from the bike, grabbed the bag, and strolled toward them. "Everything you need is here," she said, handing the bag over to Mars. "In 3 days. Here. At the same time. Don't be late. If you're not here, we won't answer anymore." She jumped on the motorcycle without waiting for an answer. Spike turned around and walked through the alley, disappearing into the dark, and leaving a trail of smoke behind him. The meeting was already over. Mars scratched his head. "Are 3 days long enough to do anything?" "It will have to be," she shrugged. "We will have to work a lot." And so it went for several weeks. They grabbed the materials every 3 days and delivered half the bombs they were able to make as promised. The meetings were always fast, straightforward. Sometimes Abby handed him the bag, sometimes Spike. No words needed to be said. They always went back home immediately after, carefully, always keeping a distance from each other. Mars would go ahead and check the way, while Wren followed carrying the package. Were there any sentinels patrolling around, Mars would signal so that she could change her route and avoid them. At home, they didn't have any free time. They worked night and day, only stopping to eat and sleep. Mars helped as much as he could, but the knowledge and hard work came mostly from Wren. The lack of free time is not something he was used to. Even raising his child, he would always need some alone time with his wife. To do nothing together. He did not have that anymore, and as time went by, tiredness built up. Sleeping was getting harder and harder each day. Isolating the worries about his wife and daughter back home became a Herculean task. Wren made it all easier, though. Her dedication to work and to building a nice environment at home was the only thing that kept him moving during that time. It made him remember one of the many traits that made him fall in love with his wife before. Intimacy between both of them already existed before they met. With time, it became real, though. It was like finding a close friend after many years apart. For some days, the conversation felt bumpy, but after some time, everything came back to normal. Every morning, very early, Wren cooked breakfast. The smell of fresh rice was always the first thing Mars felt in the day. Facing the task ahead would have been much easier had he been able to kiss her every time he woke up, but that is not how it was. "I think we are done," Mars said on a Thursday afternoon, almost 2 months after their first meeting in the alley. Wren picked up one grenade-shaped explosive, the last they had built, and carried it into the shelter. She placed it inside a metal barrel that went all the way up to her waist, together with all the others. Before turning around, she could feel Mars's hands wrapping around her waist, slightly under her breast. He kissed her on the forehead after she turned around. "Thanks for doing this," he said. "Now we can finally move to the next part of our plan." "Finally," she said, climbing the stairs, speaking over his words. "But not yet. Today we have to celebrate." She grinned. "Well, in that case, there is something I must show you." She sauntered toward her room. Mars followed her until the door, but stayed outside. She stretched her head through the door and whispered, "You can come in." He walked in. His heart rushed, and he felt a cold stitch in the middle of his stomach. A drop of sweat ran down his cheeks. "I've been waiting for an opportunity," she said, opening her closet. I'm pretty sure now is the time. When the door opened, he could see that 3 bottles of wine lay inside. He closed his eyes and exhaled. She crouched and grabbed one of them. "Bring the other one," she said, walking away. When he arrived at the kitchen, she was finishing preparing the table. 2 crystal glasses stood at the top of the red cloth, and a song played on a small stereo on the top of the counter. The guy sounded like Elvis Presley, but it wasn't him. Interesting, he thought. I wonder if this guy is also a musician back home. The usual sounds of the street weren't there. As they sat at the table, raising their glasses and eating their snacks, complete silence surrounded their place except for the faint sound of the stereo. A rare feeling of peace flooded both of them. Alarms sounded in the distance. They were almost like white noise at that point. That night, not a single word was spoken about the cave, about the fishermen, about Bogus or Agon, Spike or Abby. They ate and drank more than they ate, drank more than they planned. Hades lay the whole night under the table, waiting for food to fall on the ground, which over the evening happened considerably more often than at the start. The 3rd bottle was already halfway through when they decided to move to the couch. Hades followed them and sat on the backrest. "Do you think we'll be able to do as planned?" she asked with a slurred voice. The question brought them back to reality. "It's a long shot. We did what we could. But it's just the 2 of us. We got to try, though. At least we have the map now." "I think we'll be able to leave the city," he said. "The plan is solid on that front. I'm just still not sure how to go through the cave. We'll find a way. I'm sure of that. I don't want to leave until I'm sure you can go back safely. You're the priority. We will first get you out of the city. Then I'll do what I can to go back." "How are we getting the fishermen to help you get there? We need a boat to get to the cave." "One thing at a time. We will try. If nothing else, then at least we can get you out. I'll find a way after." "You know," Wren said with an even more slurred voice, "if I can't go through the border, I will just go with you." She slowly leaned toward him and rested her head on his shoulder. "And if you can't find the portal, you can come with me and we will live a happy life together." Her voice became lower and more slurred, slowly transitioning into unintelligible words. She slept with a smile on her face. "It would be a great plan," he whispered. He grabbed a pillow and put it under her head. He slowly kissed her forehead, got up carefully, and tiptoed toward the window. Apart from some sparse light poles, everything was dark, empty. The siren sounds were increasingly louder. His senses weren't to be trusted, but he could hear some distant shouting. He didn't pay much attention to it. He grabbed a blanket in Wren's room, came back, and put it over her. He lay on the other side of the couch, facing away from her. His eyes closed, and he fell into a deep sleep, but not for long. So that's that chapter. Again, next chapter next week. This is starting to be a good story. My next story, as I mentioned, is a little bit lengthy. So it's called Once There Was a River Here. We've always built our cities near the water. What will life be like when these rivers disappear? By Sam W., published in the Bouncin' and Behavin' blogs. It's 2 hours before noon, and the sun is already unbearable. Standing in the old gorge, I lean on my shovel and take a moment to catch my breath. My skin is red and rough, peeling and itching like mad as a fresh burn forms over the ones I already had. As I wipe the sheen of sweat from my brow, I feel my chest tighten in alarm. We can't afford to lose moisture, and working like this is dangerous. It could kill me, but so could another day without water, so I have no choice. When I started this morning, I was standing in the shadow of the old bridge, but the slow crawl of dawn growing into day has pulled the shade away. The glare is harsher now, and there's no breeze to soften the blow. I glance up towards the sky, squinting against the glare of light reflecting off the bare steel, at least where it hasn't been dulled by rust and time. It will collapse someday, and we all know it. The ominous creaking groans that carry down the canyon foretell it. We had one bad windstorm, one quake away from seeing our great monument come crashing down. One less reminder of the old world. It's still holding for the moment, and I don't want to be out here any longer than I need to be. Turning my attention back to the earth, I take up my shovel and bring it down. I throw my back into the work, cutting into the old cracked sand that was once the silt bottom of the riverbed. Turning aside the smaller stones that I can manage to lift, I dig in as deeply as the hard-packed clay permits. I throw pieces of trash and broken plastic shards away, more relics of the world before. The steady sound of chopping, scraping, and the hiss of falling sand fills the air. I'm not the only one out today. Others are poking and prodding about for suitable places further up the line. Our little settlement isn't very big, but it takes a lot to keep us going. Solar stills need to be rebuilt fairly often in this heat. We haven't had much rain this month, and we're starting to get desperate. The further down I dig, the deeper those anxieties sink in. Last month I would have struck mud by now, at least a faint ghost of moisture. That would be enough to give me hope. Today, I'm not finding anything at all. The longer we stay out, the more likely it is that we'll be bringing home a body today. At the very least, sunstroke is a constant danger. But if we give up and go home empty-handed, one of my fellows raises a call, lifting his hand into the air. We all look up, raising our arms to shield our eyes, eager to catch the sight of the sign he's making. Left hand held aloft, flat palm. We sighed collectively in a mix of slumped shoulders and muttered cursing. The fleeting rush of hope dies as quickly as it came. We have a set of signals for this job. Raised hand for attention. Thumb raised for a possible well site. Both hands raised to signify an obstacle that requires help to shift, and 2 fingers raised for the end of the working day. A flat left hand signals that he's uncovered a mass grave. We run into them from time to time. The trenches were dug decades ago, just after hope of rain began to die off, right along with the people who lived here before us. In what was either a protest, gallows humor, or the simple lack of another suitable place, those dead from thirst were brought down to the remains of the very river they once drank from. Whoever dug the graves didn't do it by hand. The pits are too wide, too deep. I've seen the machines they used to use. They're nothing but rusted-out hulks on the side of the old paved roads, but I've seen them. It'd make our job easier if we could only get them working. One of the other searchers rises from where he stopped to rest, jogging back into the light to start collecting stones from where we tossed them aside. We can't take the time to bury the bones today, but we can raise a cairn. It will mark the location for the next time we can afford to spare the manpower. It may take a week or two, but we'll be back to it and lay them to rest properly. Besides, we can't leave them in the river, what little of it is left. No one wants to share a drink with the dead. The moment of excitement stolen away by a raised hand carries off my last bit of energy as it fades. I take a moment to close my eyes, my shovel planted spade down into the earth as I lean my brow against the handle. I had precious little strength to spare in the first place. With last night spent tossing and turning, thoughts of another extended drought rolling around in my head, before the pre-dawn call to work, I was already exhausted. At this rate, we may have enough water to keep our small band going for a week at most, if we ration carefully. But in the high summer heat, convincing people to drink as little as possible is difficult at best. At worst, it might be asking for a mutiny. Thirsty children are a great motivator for violence, and nobody can cope with fear forever. What's more, after so long without rain, the next downpour is likely to cause some serious damage. Dry soil doesn't absorb water right away, and if the next rain is too heavy, we'll be at risk for a flood. With soil as dry and packed as it is, we're looking at our settlement being wiped out completely. We need to move to higher ground, further from the riverbed. Suggesting that at the meeting is not going to make me popular. But what else can we do? For now, I give in to the heavy weight of those thoughts and finally let my sore feet carry me off to the side of the cliffs. Down here by the shade beneath the bridge offers me some respite from the blazing sun. Here and there, other workers are doing the same, taking my lead and finding a moment's rest as the last stones are piled atop the makeshift grave marker. We've been told countless times that this hasn't always been like this. We've been told that this used to be a thriving stream of fresh, clean water. The sun was not so merciless. Trees covered the banks, and cool mud could be found in the dead of summer. Where barren sands and crumbling stones are now, green grass once swayed in the comforting breeze. Children used to look forward to the summertime, and people didn't need to seek shade in the forsaken grave markers of a once living city. Thousands of people lived here once. The old folks say that those massive spires of metal that block out the sun were once living spaces. The open pits on each face were once covered over with glass, and the rooms were comfortable. All you needed to find water was to turn a knob built into a wall, and it would flow, pelt down above like the rain. There was no need to wait for your tongue to turn to leather before taking another swallow. If all that's true, we've fallen from a very great height. And it must be true, because there the buildings stand. I can see them from here. Hell, you can see them from miles away. It's impossible to miss the great towering monoliths. Even if you don't see them, you'd certainly hear them. The distant rumbles, the creaks and the groans, just like the bridge, metal tilting and warping in the wind. The mournful wails of old ghosts, empty, abandoned, and ruined. Old bones that crumble a little more each year. I think that's why we avoid that side of the river. Not just for fear of something falling, of being crushed under debris when the scaffolds give out, but because of the stories. Walking through those streets, the empty bones of civilization, looking at all that we could have had if only we'd been born 100 years sooner. It hurts. It chafes and sticks in my throat to think about it, and I know I'm not the only one who feels it. I can tell by the way we all grow silent sometimes, one by one, as someone looks at the city and the others follow suit. I think it might be less painful if we could bring ourselves to leave, but we can't. We fool ourselves, claiming that the only reason we stay is for the river, that if we're patient, it may come back this season. We'll be all right if we stay close. It's a lie. We crave this place. We're addicted to the anguish, the nostalgia for a life we never got to see. And powerful people lived here once, and they had everything they could ever need. I think we're afraid that if we leave them behind us, we might never learn how they did it. We're afraid that we'll forget about them, forget that it's possible for things to be better than this. And I think in the end, it's that fear that's going to kill us all. We'll let the gouging hooks of past echoes hold us fast, bleed us dry, sap our will to survive. If we turn our backs, they'll take us, dig in under the skin with their barbs, and work themselves deeper in the more we fight against it. It'll be that fear that has us sitting here when the floods come, if the rains come. We'll be sitting here, gazing up at the fragmented beauty of the past that we will never have as the water we pray for tears our homes apart. And if the river never comes back, and if the sky refuses to weep for us, we'll be here still as the last of us tumble down into the old canyon. There won't be anyone to dig any trenches for us. Did they do this too? Did they spend their days looking backward, ignoring all that they had and taking it for granted? I hope not. I hope they were grateful for it. I hope they knew how good they had it. I hope they cherished every drop of water and thought it was as sweet as honey. It's nearly noon. The sun hasn't taken any measure of pity on us today, and I don't think it's likely to soften its gaze any time soon. With a heavy heart, I'm forced to call the crew in. We'll come back again tomorrow. We'll pray for rain tonight and do our best to keep our hopes from falling into dust. We'll stay in the shadow of our old creaking bridge and dream of the world that was over before we began. And she makes a note here. This piece was inspired by news reports of aridification and extended droughts in the United States. Climate change is wreaking havoc on our ecosystems, and the eventual loss of potable water is a problem shared by all. Over the past few years, we've seen the damage continue to get worse. Entire rivers have vanished. Lake Mead is nearly dry. The Colorado River is failing to replenish the way it used to. Water is a resource that we all depend on for our survival. We all need to do our part to conserve it. And so now I'm going to take a little break and listen to my little commercial here while I go get something to drink, and I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. I want to invite everyone to listen to Crown and Beha Stories and Poetry every Monday night at 11 p.m. Eastern Time on Reese Across America Radio. Search out www.reaseacrossamerica.org/radio by typing in the word Reese in these mobile apps, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, or TuneIn. Or find them on a web browser and join us to listen to the show and support WAA Radio, Whiskey Alpha Alpha Radio for any veterans listening. Reese Across America is a nonprofit radio station that supports veterans programs and organizations that help needy veterans. By joining us at Reese Across America, you are helping to support veterans in need across the U.S. So search us out and enjoy the shows they have to offer, and thank a veteran while you're at it. Now I want to take another minute or so to ask for a donation of any amount to help me keep this podcast going and to advertise my website. I've set up a donation tab on the Crown of Baja Stories and Poetry webpage at rss.com and a donation page on my website at www.crownofbaja.com, using PayPal for your security. This way there is no credit card info saved anywhere, and you can use any currency you wish from around the world. If you like this podcast, please share it with everyone you know in your social circles, as the writers I showcase in this podcast deserve all the exposure they can get. I created this podcast for them because I love to read their work, and I believe it should be shared with the world. Now I want to explain how to find my website. Since the show is audio only, just take the website name from the podcast logo shown here and search for it. Visitors finding the website for the first time will reach the welcome page to learn a little bit about what's inside. There you'll see a homepage link at the bottom of the page. Click on it if you wish to enter my world. And on the menu bar at the top, there are links at all the pages in the website. Feel free to look around all you want. If you should happen to want to buy one of my books, all the better. Thank you for your patronage and support. Now back to the show. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that little bit and will take heed. So now I've got 3 poems for you. My first one is entitled Lost in the Pacific Northwest, a poem by Natalie Gaspar, published in Right Under the Moon. This place looks like a place where giants once lived, with trees that tower above the cliffs and cold water that rushes over slick, mossy rocks as it cascades into a pool so clear I can see the bottom some 20 feet down. I should have brought my compass, learned to read the trails of deer that pass through delicate glades like a whisper, but I wanted to believe I could still hear the trees, that the beating of their hearts would guide me home. I followed the only voice I could hear, gave in to the drum of perpetual ocean waves beating against the rocky coastline, and found a saltwater fountain, not of youth, but of secrets and stories obscured by the salty air. The Alsea called you Halquak, a great opening in the sea. A graveyard of mussel shells adorns you like a necklace, a reminder of a people long lost to your lonely shores. Now called Thor's Well, your origins, like your name, are a mystery, destined to remain unsolved. Did the ancient god of thunder wield his mighty hammer here? Did he strike with calamitous force, so great the echo lingers in the crashing waves? Peering into your depths, your cavernous walls draped with watery veins, tiny waterfalls of life, it's easy to believe your depths hide a portal to another world. Even as the water struggles to break free, the ocean fighting against a force it can't possibly defeat, pulsing to a heartbeat all its own, as the waters fall and rise and crash in a thunderous melody that soothes the only piece of me still alive. My next story, or poem, is called A Firefly in My Palm, Sweet Craving for Eternal Light, by Mariana Bosarova. The day fades as embers glow, hostile shadows creep and grow. The spring of joy is now seized, captured tightly, unreleased. And it seems the sun is dying. In the shadows it is lonely crying. Its charcoal trails are broken, as if orange fumes it is smoking. Then the trail fades from sight into the deep darkness of night. There time is a precipice, an orphan, stuck in silent grief. Do not be afraid too much. Don't you feel the firefly's touch? It flew up and landed on my palm. I saw the light and felt so calm. And my last poem is called The Mountain, from Dave B. Now, he did not send this to a publication. This is a standalone in his own little world here, so that's a good thing, I guess. In crafting The Mountain, I sought to distill the essence of stillness through the lens of Zen minimalism, using the steadfast image of a mountain as my muse. This poem unfolds as a journey into serenity, inviting introspection amid the ceaseless whirl of existence. Each stanza is a step closer to understanding stillness, not just as an absence of motion, but as a profound presence, capable of transforming our perception of time, life, and the very fabric of our being. It's an invitation to pause, reflect, and discover the boundless tranquility within. In silence, the mountain stands, a testament to stillness in a world that never sleeps. Its peak, clothed in the quietude of clouds, whispers of timelessness to the restless hearts below. Unmoved by the season's ebb and flow, it watches, a solitary giant, rooted in the earth's embrace. In its shadow, the chaos of life finds peace, a momentary respite in the presence of its ancient calm. The mountain, a mirror to the soul's deepest yearn, reflects the silent truth. In stillness, we become boundless. And so that's all I have for you for stories and poem this week. I hope some of them are entertaining, and maybe the poems made you think a little bit. And maybe give you a moment to sit and think about it a little bit. So, again, that's all I've got for you. I hope to see you again next week. Sláinte. Garamahagat. Thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed the variety of stories and poems again this week. Maybe one of them might touch your heart a little. Disclosure for everyone. In order to read the complete stories and poems, you'll need to sign up for a subscription to Medium. If I see a link by the author on one of the stories to allow everyone to read it, I will let you know in the newsletters. Please return again next week for another episode of Crown Biha Stories and Poetry. As a Sean K, I want to continue to delight you with a story or a poem that may bring you a smile or make you think a little bit after we part for the day. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this Irish blessing as you go about your day. Long life and fair health to you. Salfada Augusprech, Sláinte Chocolate. Slán go foil. Goodbye for now.